Okay, in your outline, we're on page 2, and we were talking about Roman numeral 4. We looked at 7 lines of evidence for the existence of God, and then we got into this discussion about man. Who is man? What is man? And because when we go to Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 and 27, God said, "Let us make man in our image after our likeness." So that's the question. What does that mean, in our image after our likeness? Well, it means that the creator of the universe has endowed us with certain qualities that are intrinsic to his nature. There are many ways in which we are like him. We don't possess these qualities to the same degree he does. And there are a lot of qualities that he has that we don't possess at all. But there is a difference between us and the animal kingdom. So we asked, first of all, in discussing this, we asked the question or made the statement what it does not mean. And certainly it does not mean that we are divine. We are not God, although that's what most of the world seems to think it is. Whether you're talking about the New Age movement and its beliefs, or whether you're just talking about people in their daily lives who believe they can chart their own course and do their own thing, they are practically speaking living as if we're our own gods. And so, but we're not. We are created. Only God has certain characteristics: His omnipotence, omnipresence, omniscience, omnibenevolence. All of those things we're not. You remember in Ezekiel, speaking to the king of Tyre long ago, he mentioned, "You are a man, not a God," he said. And that's what Satan tried to get Adam and Eve to believe. You know, God says, no, he knows if you eat that you'll be like him. So, man's been trying to attain that ever since. But we know from the New Testament as well that men are not to be worshipped. Acts chapter 12, Acts chapter 14. And of course, neither are angels. We see those instances as well. And then we talked about the fact that being made in his image and after his likeness is not physical. John 4:24, God is spirit. Acts 17:29, he's not like silver, gold, or other such materials. But he's spirit, John 4:24. And in Luke 24, Jesus, in talking to Thomas and the other disciples, said, "Look, touch me, handle me, I have flesh and bones." You see, a spirit doesn't have flesh and bones. So, it's not a physical thing. You know, the Bible uses terminology for God in an accommodative way, sometimes so we can understand it. It talks about the hand of God, the eyes of God, but those aren't literal physical things. And so, not physical, and we're not God, but we are created in his image and after his likeness. So we started talking about that last week as well from Genesis chapter 1, and we noticed in Genesis chapter 2 that what makes us different from the rest of the animal creation, or from the animal creation, is the fact that God breathed into man water. The breath of life, and he became life. A living soul. So it's interesting too that, you know, with animals, you got all kinds of animals. In fact, the Bible talks about kinds, which is not corollary. It's not the same thing as species that we talk about, probably more further up the chain, or something like that. I don't know what terminology is from biology, but still, there's all kinds of animals in the world. There's not all kinds of people. There's one human race. Now, we may look different. We have different color skin, tall, short, fat, skinny, and all that kind of thing, but not like the animals. It's interesting, too, that the animals were created male and female at the same time. But the woman was actually taken out of the male. And finally, you get to Psalm chapter 8, and the Bible speaks of man being created a little lower than what? angels. So, we can't restrict this in his image and likeness to any one characteristic, but where did my thing go? But we've listed several things there that we can look at, what it does mean. And I think we mentioned a couple of these last week. Man is capable of speech. He can communicate. Animals do not speak. They can mimic. You know, when I used to go to, I don't know that he's there anymore. Does anybody go to Russell's Nursery in Collierville? Used to be a parrot in there. So is he still there? He'll talk to you. He'll say hello or something. But he doesn't know what it means. He's just mimicking. Animals can't do that. And if they do that, we know that it's a miracle. Right? Balaam's donkey spoke to him, but it wasn't really the donkey. Balaam was so mad, he didn't really catch it at first. He's kind of like one of these drivers on 385. He was that mad. Actually, I saw a couple on Church Road yesterday. I was coming from South Haven, and these two got into it. And I'm in the left lane, and man, they go by me, one in the turn lane and one in this lane. And one of them getting in front of the other one, stop. People are crazy. But man can speak, he can communicate. And I think we mentioned that he's creative. I think that's kind of where we left off last week. You ever seen that Yellowwood commercial with the beavers? You know, where they go looking for the Yellowwood because it's got this Yellowwood stamp on it. They're building that elaborate beaver palace out in the woods. Beavers don't do that. Beavers create, I mean, they build the same house. Spiders build the same web. They don't call the beaver architect and get the beaver contractor and come up and have 6 bedrooms for their beaver house. That's not the way it works. Because they're using what to build these things? Instinct. Simply instinct. It's been programmed into their DNA. They're not creative. Animals don't appreciate aesthetics. One beaver doesn't walk by the other beaver's place and say, man, that's a good looking place you got there. Like we do. And closely related to that gift of creativity is the gift of reason. Now, animals possess some measure of understanding. You know, you can train some animals to do some things. My dog will shake your hand. My dog knows certain commands. He knows left and right. I'll say my dog, it's not my dog. For those of you that know sport, he's not my dog. He's a mama's boy. But apes can be trained. Birds can be trained. You know, have you ever seen that show? Let's see, where was I at this past January? I was at Universal Studios. They have a bird show. Well, they have an animal show. They have an animal show, you know, animal actors. Y'all been to that? And they got dogs, but they got cats, and they got birds that'll fly here to there and do whatever they train them to do. How did you train animals to do that, by the way? Yeah, but what do you get? Yeah, what'd you say? Reward. Yeah, you keep that pocket full of treats, and every time they do the same thing that you want to do. That's what dog trainers train. So, but their intelligence is not like man's. I like what this biologist wrote. The purest and most complex manifestation of man's symbolic nature is his capacity for conceptual thought. You understand that I can actually think about thinking about something. You know that I'm self-aware. I know that I'm separate from this universe, separate from you, and that, yes, I can sit here and think, do I want to think today or not think today? Animals don't do that. That's conceptual thinking. That is, for thought involving sustained and high-order abstraction and generalization. Conceptual thought enables man to make himself independent of stimulus boundness that characterizes animal thinking. Animals, especially primates, give undeniable evidence of something analogous to human thought, analogous yet medically different in that their thought is bound to the immediate stimulus situation and to the felt impulse of the organism. Animal thinking, too, is riveted to the realm of survival, broadly speaking, and therefore encompasses a variety of needs pertinent to the species as well as to the individual. These differences account for the distinction between conceptual thought, which is the exclusive prerogative of man, and perceptual thought, a cognitive function based directly upon sense perception, which man shares with other animals. Basically, what animals think about is their basic needs. Sleeping, eating, drinking, and sexual reproduction. We have the capability to think about so many other things. And that's different. So that question is not can animals think, but the question is can they think the way humans think? And the answer obviously is no. And of course one of the biggest differences is they don't have the capacity to know and love God. An animal doesn't look up at the heavens in Psalm 19:1 and say, man, the heavens declare the glory of God. The firmament shows his handiwork, but expands. Nor can they perceive, like Romans 1:20 talks about. And animals are not accountable for their actions. Right? Morality-wise, and we'll talk about that a little more, but we don't punish dogs for taking bones from other dogs. They have no morality. They've not violated anything. They're just doing what dogs do. Now, we may put down an animal that's dangerous, but not because he's, quote, sinned in some way. Even if he kills a human, he's reacted to his environment, and his perception of reality, and his survival instinct. And so, we do that really to protect other humans, more so than to punish him. And so, we don't arrest animals for rape when the horse or the bull or the dog attacks the female. That's just what they do. And so, they're not accountable. Man is a volitional creature. What do I mean by volitional? Yeah, we can choose. We can choose our path, our destiny, our choice. We can decide what we want to do with our lives. Animals don't do that. They react to their environment by instinct. I mean, think about those salmon swim back upstream, all that kind of stuff. Or the Arctic tern that flies 22,000 miles. Round trip from the Arctic to the Antarctic and back. Does that out of instinct. I mean, frankly, if he could think and conceptualize like us, why would he do that? I mean, you know. Well, I think I'll just fly 11,000 miles a day and 11,000 miles back at a certain time. I mean, no, we wouldn't do that. So we don't rely upon instinct for our survival. We plot the course of our own life. We think rationally. Joshua 24, Joshua says, choose you this day whom you will serve. We know man has freedom of choice, ability to reason and rationalize and account for his actions. And of course, perhaps the greatest difference there, number 5, man has an immortal soul. He formed our bodies from the dust of the ground, but Zechariah 12:1 says he what else? He forms what else? Forms the spirit with the spirit of man within him. Zechariah 12:1. Ecclesiastes 12:7 says our spirit returns to who? The one who gave it. Adam was called in Luke 3:38 the Son of God. Acts 17:29, Paul said, by the Holy Spirit, we are the offspring of God. Hebrews 12:9 says he is the Father of spirits. So let's put those together. He created our bodies out of the dust of the ground. Jesus says there's a difference between spirit and flesh and bones. Zechariah says he formed the spirit of man within him. Ecclesiastes says, my spirit will return to the one who gave it. He's called the Father Spirit in Hebrews. So what that tells me is that this idea of hereditary original sin is impossible. Which is the whole plank upon which Calvinism is based. Because I don't get my spirit from my parents, my physical parents. My spirit comes from God. Therefore, it is easy, make sure you understand this correctly. If I'm going to teach that men are born with inherited sin, it is as easy for me to teach that as it is for me to teach that God has sin. Because where did I get my spirit? The Father of spirits. And if it came sinful, that's the way He gave it. And we know it does, because He has no sin. I can get all kinds of problems from my physical parents. I can be born with a predisposition to cancer, genetically, heart disease, diabetes, because of my physical family. But not spiritual sin. Not because sin is a spiritual disease. Of course, man alone possesses, as it says here, number 6, an inherent religious inclination. How many animals do you see looking to worship? Not too many. Chimpanzees and dogs don't build altars, sing hymns, pray. But man has this inherent, man is going to worship something. And in fact, studies have been done no matter what civilization, no matter how deep in the Amazonian or the Congo jungle you want to go, any culture is going to worship something. Now, they might worship rocks and trees, and they might worship their ancestors, might even worship ourselves. You know, it's interesting to me the fact that animals do not worship God. And yet the evolutionist tells me I'm just an animal. Why in the world would we invent God if we're animals? I'm out here living my life, living by instinct, doing whatever I want to do, acting any way I want to act, frankly, only concerned about my own personal survival. So I get together with other animals and decide, hey, how about we invent a higher power that holds us accountable? It makes me feel guilty about my choices, if I have any choices. It holds me accountable for my actions. Why would I invent such a being? Who was the first guy that came up with that? And that's what the evolutionist says. This is all evolved. Our belief in God, even. Why would I do that? If everybody's trying to get back to the point where they can be their own gods and do their own thing and not be held accountable, why did we come up with it? Come up with this concept to begin with? And only man of all creatures on the earth has a conscience, a sense of oughtness. You get up in the morning, you know you ought to do this, and you ought to do that, and you ought not to do that. Animals don't have a moral sense of oughtness, as we already mentioned. Sport, now he likes to get into the garbage can and eat certain kinds of paper. Not copy paper, soft stuff. Kleenexes, tissues, and things of that nature. That doesn't bother him. And you can get on to him. Don't do that. But you know what? If he gets an opportunity to do it again, he's going to do it. So, that's why you now have a garbage can in the church office that has a lid on it. no sense of office on the part of animals like people. And so we are created in God's image and likeness, and there's just some things that the evolutionists can't explain if we're just higher forms of animals. You got something? Yeah.
Man, you know, I've always got something.
Well, you just keep doing it. For a minute, you do this, and then you...
I'm sorry.
And then you do this again.
Well, I'm sorry, I didn't realize I was doing that subconsciously. Yeah, but look, your conscience can also be trained to do the wrong thing, too. I think conscience is a part of your cognition. That's just Rufus, okay? That's not written.
Well, the fact that we have a conscience, whether it's trained properly or not, is different from animals. The fact that you have an inner guide that says you should do this or shouldn't do that. Now, what you should do and shouldn't do, you may not have been trained properly on. Your conscience may approve of some things that shouldn't. It may disapprove of some things that are okay. Because I know people that have problems with some things, and I'm like, well, I don't know what your problem with that is. But the fact of the matter is, the fact that we even have a conscience is different from anything else on earth.
Well, I concur with that. My point is simply this. I was talking to your dad a week or so ago, and while there are many things that have changed during my 81 years of life, in fact, I saw something the other day. I was telling Pearl about this a while ago. Here's a guy trying to do something with one hand. He reaches over to the faucet, the other, and says, give me 10 ounces of water to his faucet. Well, there's a reason for that. But my point is simply this. Well, let me forget it. I'm going to get off base here.
And don't get me off base now.
No, I'm getting me off base.
Yeah, but you get off base and then you get me off subject.
But look, I just believe...
Well, we'll cut you some slack. It's better today.
I believe that the way we treat one another hasn't changed since man was created.
Oh, absolutely.
Our behavior toward one another hasn't changed much.
Yeah.
And I think that has a lot to do with the cognition. And matter of fact, in some ways, it's gotten worse. While we have all these devices to help our lives to improve, our behavior toward one another hasn't changed.
No, behavior hasn't changed a whole lot. I'm not sure it's any worse. I know we like to think, everybody likes to think theirs is the worst, their generation. Just like we like to always think about the good old days when maybe they weren't as good as we'd like to remember.
Well, Greg, that's
generally things aren't as good as we thought they were, and generally they're not as bad as we think they are. That's just my
opinion. That's not what I'm saying.
Yeah, but I understand.
The good old days were good for who?
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that I can study the Roman Empire and see that pretty bad. Those people were pretty depraved before Christ came on the scene. So.
Right?
Yeah.
Part of conscience is how you were raised, what your parents told you. They say a child is from 1 to 7. They develop added values.
Oh, absolutely. But that's the whole point. The conscience is just our inner guide to what's right and wrong. Now, what's right and wrong that's dependent upon our training. And so that's why it's important to train it properly.
Absolutely.
The conscience, the closer it is aligned with the Word of God, then the more reliable it is. And the further away from its training from the Word of God, the less reliable it is. But everybody has one. That's the point. And animals do not have one, period.
I used to get a kick out of this. A kid goes into the military, but 17 years or 18 years, he's not been too good, and all of a sudden gets into the Marine Corps or the Air Force, and that drill instructor has to make him over again as a good person. 6 weeks to 2 months. How that happens.
Well, he's just got to get him to do what he's told. That's all. It does have to make him a good person.
Not everybody conforms.
Leavenworth is full of people that didn't.
There's my point, Greg. We've got more jailhouses bubbling over today than ever in the history. I know there's more people.
There's more people. Yeah, there are probably 1 billion people on the earth when the flood came. That was one quick death sentence, wasn't it? We're getting off the subject. By the way, did you know MC Hammer was in the Navy for 3 years? Did you know that? Yeah. You all see that in the paper? They had famous celebrities in the paper that had been in the service. I just thought that was kind of interesting. There were some others in there. I'm trying to think who else was in there. It's pretty good. You don't know No, he was famous for longer than that. He had more than 15 minutes. I was thinking, well, they just had several celebrities in there, that what branch they were in and how long they were in. Pat Sajak was a disc jockey in Vietnam. I thought that was kind of like that Cronauer guy that they did the movie about. Yeah. Yeah. All right, let's get back to this. Well, we've talked about God's existence and our relationship. Who are we? The number one argument supposedly in the atheist arsenal for the non-existence of an all-powerful, benevolent creator is the existence of suffering, and really specifically what they would call unnecessary suffering, causeless suffering, innocent suffering. Some people suffer and deserve to suffer. Okay, so, and we can't deny the fact that the amount of suffering since the foundation of the world is frankly staggering. We could go through a lot of examples. Did you know, we're talking about, number one, let's talk about natural disasters. I always like these stats. I'm not going to go over a bunch of these, but did you know in 1556, 830,000 people died in an earthquake in China? It's almost 1 million people in an earthquake. Did you know in 1918 that 50 million people in the world died from the flu? Worldwide flu epidemic. 50 million. Hurricanes, cyclones, earthquakes, tornadoes, floods, tsunamis, droughts, volcanoes. Natural disasters kill 1 million people around the world each decade, and of course leave millions more homeless, and so forth. That's according to the United Nations International Decade for Natural Disaster Reduction. I don't know how you're going to reduce natural disasters, but have at it. Natural disasters have killed billions. Well, not far behind that is man's inhumanity to man, right? As you mentioned.
That's the point, yes.
We could go through a lot of bad examples. And this has always interested me, I found it curious, is that when you go back to World War II, all anybody wants to talk about is Hitler and the Nazis. Hitler and the Nazis. Hitler and the Nazis. Hitler and the Nazis were terrible people. They killed supposedly 6 million Jews. I think they could have been more than that. They killed a lot of people. Joseph Stalin, who was supposed to be our ally. I guess the reason nobody talks about Stalin and Mao Zedong is because they're communist and it's in to be a communist. You know, if you're a leftist, that's okay. Stalin killed 30 million of his own. Mao Zedong in China, 1949, 1979, 1975, 40 million people. 40 million.
Much of that's from starvation.
Do what?
A lot of that's from starvation.
Absolutely. Well, that's what the guy does in North Korea. Starves them. Total number of casualties in World War I, military and civilian, 37 million. 16 million dead, 21 million wounded, 56 million deaths in World War II, counting both military and civilian. And then we talk about terrorists and all that kind of thing. And then you think about the suffering inflicted upon children in our society by depraved adults. 45% of rapes reported to the police in South Africa are child rapes. 50% of South African children will be abused before the age of 18. You know how many children we've killed in this country before they were born? 50 million. You know how many the Chinese have killed before they were born? 400.
How many?
400 million people. Somebody says, there's not going to be many people in heaven. Well, that's 450 million right there. And that's not even talking about divorce, depression, alcoholism, drug addiction, crime. For youth between the ages of 10 and 24, suicide is the third leading cause of death. I understand suicide is just skyrocketing.
Yeah.
We tell children they're animals. There's no meaning to life. And then we tell them that the world's going to end in 10 years from climate change. And then we wonder why they're killing themselves. So, widespread pervasive illness, sickness, and death resulting without any apparent connection to an individual's own actions. That's what we call causeless suffering. Jesus on one occasion saw a blind man sitting there, and his disciples said, what? Who sinned? This man or his parents? Well, obviously the disciples thought somebody had sinned. They only gave him two options. This man or his parents. That was obviously a common belief of the day. And people still believe that. Jesus said neither this man nor his parents. On another occasion, in Luke chapter 13, some people came to Jesus and told him about the Galileans whose blood Pilate mingled with their sacrifices. There they were, in the middle of their worship and sacrifices, and Pilate's men slaughtered them, such that their blood was mixed with the blood of the animals. And Jesus said, you think that these men were more sinners above anybody else? More than you, just because of what happened to them? What did Jesus say? What about those 18 on whom the tower and Siloam fell? You ever get up some days and think, man, I'm having a terrible day. I must not be doing something right. You ever said that to yourself? Don't say that. What about human error and freak accidents? That's nobody's fault. Automobile accidents, plane crashes, boat sinking if you're on the Titanic. Every day, 10 people die from unintentional drowning, 2 of which are children under the age of 15. The U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission says 390 children die annually in pool and spa drownings. Well, they didn't deserve that. So the world is drenched in heartache, misery, and agony. Somebody says, man, you're cheering me up. I feel like those guys on Hee-Haw. Gloom, despair, and agony on me, deep, dark depression, excessive misery. If it weren't for bad luck, I'd have no luck at all. Gloom, despair, and agony. I used to love those dogs, man.
Yeah, I don't know what to think that.
Why do bad things happen to good people? Where is God? Does He exist? And why does He stand idly by while all this suffering and anguish and affliction goes on? And why would He create such a world in the first place? Introduce humans into such an environment? Is He some kind of sadistic monster that likes to see us squirm? What's His problem? That's what the atheist would say. So, my conclusion as an atheist is, if He's all-powerful, He's not all good, because if He was all good and all-powerful, He'd solve all of this. And if He's all good, He must not be all-powerful, and He can't stop it. Well, we always have to admit, when we talk about suffering, that no one has all the answers. But that doesn't mean we don't have the answers that we need. Satisfactory, sufficient answers. And it is my position that only the Christian worldview has those answers. Only the Bible that has those answers. That allows us to fit the pieces of the puzzle together. Understand it, like Job, who was in the dark for a while. Let's talk about it. What's our outline say? Unsatisfactory approaches. Well, if atheism and evolution is correct, the physical realm has no purpose but is a cosmic accident. Hence, that means that suffering also is what? If the universe as a whole has no purpose, then what does that tell me about suffering? It has no purpose either. It's meaningless. It's a chance phenomenon in a nonsensical universe. So, yeah.
Because the good has to be bad. And if man did nothing but good, then he is good and bring more angels, he doesn't have to go to the shoes.
Yeah, we'll get to all that in our outline, but that doesn't answer all of it. I mean, there's a lot of suffering out there that's not a result of somebody's bad actions.
Okay, but Jesus suffered.
Do y'all want to teach the class? I mean, I got a whole outline. And y'all keep skipping ahead on it. You're just not taking it in. We're talking about unsatisfactory approaches right now. So, the sad thing is that even some religious people are somewhat puzzled and respond in anger and resentment when bad things happen in their lives. Things don't go their way. Yeah. And that's what Calvinism says. I mean, there's not, well, I say that back. I started to say there's not a meaner God in the universe than the one of Calvinism, but I would have to say the one of Islam is maybe meaner. The astrologer, the psychic, and the fatalist say it's simply fate, right? It's written in the stars, pre-programmed into the fabric of the universe. Therefore, the only way to cope is to gain insight into the future by tapping into the psychic forces and cosmic patterns in hope of anticipating what lies ahead. I don't know why that's advantageous, frankly. Even if I knew what lies ahead, why does that help? Isn't it a blessing that you don't know the day of your death? What kind of burden would that be to live your life like Christ? To know from, as he walked this earth and for 3.5 years in his earthly ministry, he knew exactly where he was headed and when he was headed there. It's got to be a tremendous burden. The Buddhist, Hindu, and the New Ager say existence is cyclical and suffering is the result of passing repeatedly through multiple lives in an effort to get it right, whatever that means. But here's the problem. You have no recollection of the mistakes you've already made in the next life, right? I mean, I was a bug in the prior life, now I'm a dog in this life. I don't remember the mistakes I made in that one, so how am I going to get it right? So again, my suffering was meaningless. Suffered no, and there was no purpose to it. Couldn't help me correct my problems. If Islam is correct, pain and suffering are the result of failing to submit to Allah, whose harsh, cruel response is to torment His creatures. Those are all extremely unsatisfactory approaches. And so, we're going to end our class on that high note of encouragement. And we'll move into some satisfactory approaches and talk about some other ramifications of human suffering and their causes.